From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
People have fairly promptly tried to label you as a racist or a bigot or whatever you want to say. How does that make you feel?
Well, it does not feel good.
During more than 9 hours of questioning before the Senate, President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General, Republican Senator Jeff Sessions, was repeatedly disrupted by protesters who chanted "No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA." We'll get response from Reverend Dr. William Barber, president of the North Carolina NAACP, who led a protest of hundreds on Monday in the Capitol, and with Democratic Congress member Luis Gutiérrez, co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus.
Let me tell you where I will not be on Inauguration Day. I will not be here or outside at the inauguration ceremony. I will be in Washington late that evening because the event I'm going to is on January 21st. It's the Women's March on Washington.
We'll also get response to President Obama's farewell address in Chicago Tuesday night.
After my election, there was talk of a post-racial America. And such a vision, however well-intended, was never realistic. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society.
We'll also speak with Reverend Barber and Congressman Gutierrez about how white supremacist and convicted murderer Dylan Roof has received the death penalty for murdering 9 black worshipers. And we'll talk about the push for President Obama to grant clemency to Puerto Rican independence activist Oscar Lopez Rivera. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Potentially explosive news surfaced yesterday of unsubstantiated reports which have already been presented to President-elect Donald Trump, President Obama, and the nation's top lawmakers, and have now been published online by BuzzFeed that claim Russia has compromising information on Trump and that Trump's team knew about alleged Russian hacking and leaking of Democratic Party emails during the 2016 presidential campaign. The allegations were summarized in a 2-page appendix to a report on Russian interference in the election, which Trump was briefed on last week. The summary is based on memos compiled by a former British intelligence operative. The information in the memos, which has not been independently verified by the FBI nor any major media outlets, includes claims that Trump representatives met multiple times with Russian officials during the 2016 campaign and discussed the hacking of the DNC and the email of Hillary Clinton campaign co-chair John Podesta. The memos also allege Russia has a sex tape of Trump from 2013 involving sex workers. CNN is reporting some of these allegations were reported to top lawmakers during classified briefings last fall. In October, then Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid sent a letter to FBI Director Comey, writing, quote, "It has become clear that you possess explosive information about close ties and coordination between Donald Trump, his top advisors, and the Russian government, a foreign interest openly hostile to the United States," unquote. The Guardian is reporting the FBI applied for a warrant over the summer from the secret FISA court in order to monitor top Trump campaign members who the FBI suspected of being in communication with Russian officials. The Guardian reports the FISA court rejected the FBI's initial application. Mother Jones was the first outlet to report some of these allegations in an article the week before the election. In response to the publication of the unsubstantiated memos, journalist Glenn Greenwald expressed skepticism, tweeting, quote, "An anonymous person claiming to be an ex-British intel agent and working as a Dem-Oppo researcher said anonymous people told him things," unquote. Following the news reports Tuesday, comedian Seth Meyers questioned Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway about the reports. Conway was recently named by Trump to the position of counselor to the president. This clip begins with Conway.
We should be concerned that intelligence officials leak to the press and won't go and tell the president-elect or the president of the United States himself now, Mr. Obama, what the information is. They would rather go tell the press.
But the report was the press report was about
allegation.
them going to the president.
And it says that they never briefed him on it, that they appended two pages to the bottom of his intelligence report.
I believe it said they did brief him on it.
Well, he has said that he is not aware of that.
Okay. That concerns me.
No.
I'm concerned.
No,
but in general, I just want to... I understand. No, I understand that...
and it's not true.
What is not true? That I'm concerned?
No, that I see.
Okay, I assure you I am.
Following the news reports, Trump tweeted, quote, "Fake news, a total political witch hunt," unquote. Donald Trump is slated to give his first news conference in nearly 6 months today. Trump's last news conference was July 27th, when he called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email servers. President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for U.S. Attorney General, Republican Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, faced more than 9 hours of testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, during which he denied being a racist and tried to distance himself from Trump's most extreme positions. The hearing was repeatedly disrupted by protesters who chanted, "No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA." During one interruption, protesters wore white hooded robes and pretended to be members of the Ku Klux Klan.
Jefferson, thank you so much for being here for the people. What do we have to do? Wait a minute, you can't arrest me, I'm white. White people don't get arrested. Wait a minute. White people, what do we have to do? Wait for the inauguration? What is this craziness? I'm a white man. You cannot take me out of here. I own this government. White people own this government. Is that why are you me?
During his 2 decades on Capitol Hill, Senator Sessions has opposed legislation that provides a path to citizenship for immigrants, questioned if the Constitution guarantees citizenship to anyone born in the United States, criticized the courts for interpreting the separation of church and state too broadly, and has declared same-sex marriage a threat to American culture. He also voted against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, opposed the Voting Rights Act, and has a history of making racist comments, which included reportedly saying he thought the KKK was, quote, okay until I found out they smoked pot, unquote. In 1986, Coretta Scott King wrote a letter opposing Sessions for a federal judgeship, writing, quote, "The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he will be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. I believe his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we have made toward fulfilling my husband's dream," unquote. Sessions was not confirmed for the federal judgeship in 1986 over concerns about his history of racist comments. We'll have more on Senator Sessions' confirmation hearing after headlines. Confirmation hearings continue on Capitol Hill today with day 2 of questioning for Sessions, along with a hearing for Trump's transportation secretary pick, Elaine Chao, and another for his choice of Secretary of State, longtime CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, who stepped down from his position in December. Tillerson could face questions about his ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his position on Trump's vow to cancel the Paris Climate Accord. Opponents also want Tillerson to respond to allegations that under his leadership, ExxonMobil had a policy of promoting human rights but continued to work in close partnership with repressive regimes. A handful of the confirmation hearings scheduled for this week have been delayed after concerns the nominees had not been vetted by the Office of Government Ethics. As of Monday afternoon, the ethics disclosure reports for 4 Trump nominees slated to go before the Senate this week had not been made public at all. The hearings have now been delayed for Betsy DeVos, Trump's education secretary nominee, Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo for CIA director, billionaire Wilbur Ross for commerce secretary, and Andrew Puzder for labor secretary. Workers at Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, the 2 fast food chains run by Trump's labor secretary pick, Andrew Puzder, spoke about widespread wage theft and abuse at his restaurants on Tuesday during a forum hosted by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and Washington Senator Patty Murray. A survey by Restaurant Opportunities Center United has found a shocking 2/3 of women working at Puzder's restaurants experience sexual harassment at work, 1/3 of Pfizer workers said they've had some of their wages stolen or not received required breaks. The report also called into question the food safety standards at Pfizer's restaurants, with nearly 80% of Pfizer workers saying they'd prepared or served food while they were sick. President Obama gave his farewell presidential address at Chicago's McCormick Place Convention Center Tuesday night. In the sweeping and at times emotional speech, President Obama spoke about everything from the Affordable Care Act to his love for his wife, First Lady Michelle Obama. He also offered veiled critiques of President-elect Donald Trump's anti-immigrant and xenophobic campaign proposals and invoked what he called the country's call to citizenship.
For 240 years, our nation's call to citizenship has given work and purpose to each new generation. It's what led patriots to choose republic over tyranny, pioneers to trek west, slaves to brave that makeshift railroad to freedom. It's what pulled immigrants and refugees across oceans and the Rio Grande. It's what pushed women to reach for the ballot. It's what powered workers to organize. It's why GIs gave their lives at Omaha Beach, in Iwo Jima, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And why men and women from Selma to Stonewall were prepared to give theirs as well.
During President Obama's speech Tuesday night, he, the first United States black president, also spoke about racism.
After my election, there was talk of a post-racial America. And such a vision, however well-intended, was never realistic. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society.
We'll have more on President Obama's farewell speech later in the broadcast with Reverend William Barber and Congressman Luis Gutiérrez. In South Carolina, white supremacist and convicted murderer Dylan Roof has received the death penalty for murdering 9 black worshipers, including Pastor Clementa Pinckney, at the historic Emmanuel AME Church in June of 2015. During the trial, prosecutors quoted excerpts of a racist manifesto written by Roof while he was held in a Charleston jail. Roof wrote, quote, "I would like to make it crystal clear I do not regret what I did. I am not sorry. I have not shed a tear for the innocent people I killed," unquote. On Monday, after about 3 hours of deliberations, the jury returned with the unanimous decision that Roof should be put to death. Reverend Sharon Reicher, the daughter of one of Roof's victims, Ethel Lee Lance, said, quote, "I don't believe in the death penalty, but I'm my mother's child, and with everything that's happened, sometimes I want him to die. It's like, you know what, this fool continues to just be evil," unquote. We'll have more on Dylan Roof's death sentence later in the broadcast with Reverend Barber. More allegations of sexual harassment have surfaced at Fox News, this time against the network's top anchor, Bill O'Reilly. The New York Times has reported that in the weeks after Fox chair Roger Ailes was ousted over allegations of sexual harassment by more than 20 women, Fox News paid anchor Juliette Huddy a 6-figure sum to stay quiet about allegations Bill O'Reilly repeatedly sexually harassed her. A letter by Huddy's lawyer says O'Reilly called her all the time and sometimes sounded like he was masturbating. The letter also accuses O'Reilly of trying to kiss Huddy and once opening the door to his hotel room where he'd asked her to return a key in his boxer shorts. The letter says when Ruddy rejected O'Reilly's advances, he retaliated against her both on air and at the office. Fox News and Bill O'Reilly have rejected the allegations. In Afghanistan, at least 30 people have been killed in 2 bombings near the parliament building in Kabul. Another 70 people were wounded in the 2 explosions. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for both attacks. In Yemen, a U.S.-backed Saudi-led airstrike has killed 5 people near an elementary school in northern Yemen. At least 2 children were killed in the bombing. Despite concerns about being implicated in possible war crimes, the United States has continued to sell warplanes and munitions to the Saudi-led coalition throughout its bombing of Yemen, and U.S.-made munitions have been found at the scene of Saudi-led bombings where civilians have been killed. And Rita Lasar, co-founder of the September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, has died at the age of 85. Her brother Abe Zalmanowitz died on the 27th floor of the World Trade Center during the 9/11 attacks after he refused to leave until emergency workers came to help rescue his best friend, Ed, a paraplegic who worked next to him. Lazar went on to become a peace activist who traveled to Afghanistan to meet with the families of those killed in the U.S. war there. This is a clip of a remarkable conversation on Democracy Now! In 2002 between Rita Lazar and Masouda Sultan, an Afghan woman living in New York at the time of the 9/11 attacks, who soon learned that 19 members of her family had been killed by the U.S. attacks in Afghanistan. This is Rita Lazar.
President Bush mentioned him in the National Cathedral speech and cited him as being a hero. And I realized that my government was going to use my brother as justification for killing other people. And that had a tremendous impact on me. I didn't want that to happen, not in my brother's name. And so I wrote a letter to the Times, which they printed, asking our government to please be cautious and not do something they couldn't take back. And then I was asked to speak at a peace rally, and I did it. And just before I went on, I was told they had started bombing Afghanistan. And I realized something I had never realized before. I'd heard the term collateral damage all my life. It was always used about people far away from us. And I realized now what it meant, because my brother was collateral damage in a war that he didn't want and Masouda's people didn't want.
That was Rita Lazar speaking on Democracy Now! In 2002. She died of cancer at her East Village apartment on Sunday. The United States war in Afghanistan continues. It's the longest war in U.S. history. Among those who survive her son Matthew Lazar, who wrote the history of Pacifica Radio. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. On Tuesday, President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for U.S. Attorney General, Republican Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, faced more than 9 hours of testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, during which he denied being a racist and tried to distance himself from Trump's most extreme promises. The hearing was repeatedly disrupted by protesters who chanted, "No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA." This is Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina questioning Sessions.
People have fairly promptly tried to label you as a racist or a bigot or whatever you want to say. How does that make you feel? And this is your chance to say something to those people.
Well, it does not feel good.
This whole fascist regime needs to be stopped before they start.
During his 2 decades on Capitol Hill, Senator Sessions has opposed legislation that provides a path to citizenship for immigrants, questioned if the Constitution guarantees citizenship to anyone born in the United States, and has criticized the courts for interpreting the separation of church and state too broadly, and has declared same-sex marriage a threat to American culture. He also voted against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, opposed the Voting Rights Act, and has a history of making racist comments, which included reportedly saying he thought the Ku Klux Klan was, quote, okay until I found out they smoked pot, unquote. On Tuesday, Sessions described allegations of bigotry that have dogged his career as damnably false charges.
I abhor the Klan and what it represents and its hateful ideology. I insisted Marsh Dees of the Southern Poverty Law Center and his lawsuit that led to the successful collapse of the Klan, at least in Alabama, the seizure of their building, at least for that period of time. As Civil Rights Division attorneys have testified before the committee, I supported fully their historic cases that the Justice Department filed to advance civil rights and that I supported, including cases to desegregate schools, abolish at-large elections for cities, county commissions, and school boards. These at-large elections were a mechanism used to block African-American candidates from being able to be elected to boards and commissions. It was a deliberate and part of a systemic plan to reduce the ability of African Americans to have influence in the election and governing process. I never declared the NAACP was un-American or that a civil rights attorney was a disgrace to his race. There is nothing I am more proud of than my 14 years of service in the Department of Justice.
Jeff Sessions was the first sitting senator to endorse Trump for the presidency in early 2016. During Tuesday's hearing, he was asked about the legal boundaries of the Trump administration. He said he would reject a ban on Muslim immigration and that he would enforce a 2015 law that outlawed waterboarding terrorism suspects, even though he'd previously opposed the law. He was questioned by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
As a question of law, does waterboarding constitute torture?
Well, there was a dispute about that when we had the torture definition in our law. The Department of Justice memorandum concluded it did not necessarily prohibit that, but Congress has taken an action now that makes it absolutely improper and illegal to use waterboarding or any other form of torture in the United States by our military and by all our other departments and agencies.
Senator Sessions also declared he would recuse himself from any decisions on Hillary Clinton's emails for the Clinton Foundation. During Tuesday's hearing, Sessions appeared to have support from moderate Republican senators like Susan Collins of Maine and Democrats like Joe Manchin III of West Virginia. Today, the Senate is expected to hear from those who support and oppose his confirmation, including officials from the NAACP and ACLU, two groups Sessions reportedly once called un-American. Also set to testify are civil rights icon and Democratic Congressman John Lewis and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, marking the first time in Senate history a sitting senator will testify against another sitting senator for a cabinet post during a confirmation hearing. When we come back from break, we'll be joined by Chicago Congressman Luis Gutiérrez, Democrat of Illinois, member of the House Judiciary Committee, co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and from Raleigh, North Carolina, Reverend Dr. William Barber, president of the North Carolina NAACP. Stay with us.
Splish splash, I was taking a bath, long about a Saturday night. Yeah. Rubbed up, just relaxing in the tub, thinking everything was all right. Well, I stepped out the tub, put my feet on the floor, I wrapped the towel around me and I opened the door, and in a splish splash, I jumped back in the bath. Well, how was I to know there was a party going on? There was a splishing and a splash, reeling with the feeling, moving and a grooving, rocking and a rolling. I saw the whole gang dancing on my living room rug. Yeah, flip-flops, they was doing the bop. All the teens had the dancing bug. There was Lollipop with a Peggy Sue. The golly Miss Molly was a
Bobby Darin's Splish Splash here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
For more on the confirmation hearings for President-elect Trump for Jeff Sessions, we are joined by two guests. From the Cannon Rotunda on Capitol Hill, we're joined by Congressman Luis Gutiérrez, Democrat of Illinois, a member of the Judiciary Committee and the co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He just released a statement saying why I will not be at inauguration and will be marching with women. Also with us is Reverend Dr. William Barber, president of the North Carolina NAACP, and Tomorrow Monday's leader. On Monday, he led about 500 demonstrators to the Russell Senate office building, where they marched through the marble hallways and delivered an anti-Sessions petition to the offices of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and others. Reverend Barber is the author of Third Reconstruction, Tomorrow Monday's Fusion Politics and the Rise of a New Justice Movement. Welcome, both of you, to Democracy Now!, both of you back to the show. Reverend Barber, I'd like to ask you about the protest you led against Jeff Sessions, and your response now that you've heard some of his testimony yesterday at the Senate.
Well, first of all, Juan and Amy, thank you so much for having us. Repairers of the breach, along with Faith in Public Life, with my good friend Reverend Jennifer Butler, and 500 clergy and impacted persons. We led a Tomorrow Monday march to McConnell's office, Senate Leader McConnell, asking him and all of the other senators to reject the Sessions nomination. This was the first time we understand that clergy have done this at this period. We really believe it's a moral crisis, and there's so much camouflaging that we have to get underneath so that we can get to the truth. First of all, when we talk about Jeff Sessions, they say, well, he's a Methodist. Well, so was George Wallace. They say, well, he's cordial. Well, Southern cordiality and racial animosity are two different things altogether. They say that he's been respectful. Well, you can be respectful. Jesse Helms had certain levels of respect, but he was very racist in his policies. What we look at now is where Sessions has stood on the issues. And let me point out what I mean by that. First of all, he has shown a contempt for the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged. And then Section 2 says the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article. For 1,296 days, Senator Sessions has been a part of the group that has kept the Congress from enforcing the 15th Amendment by fixing Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. He has a contempt for the 15th Amendment. He has called the Voting Rights Act an intrusive piece of legislation. That is the legislation that people died for. He says it is intrusive. In other words, it's a bother. He has stood against voting rights. He has applauded the Shelby decision, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, and has done nothing in the Congress to fix it. Even on yesterday, he said he did not know anything about the biggest voter suppression case in the country right now, the NAACP versus McCrory, where the court said that North Carolina engaged in intentional racial discrimination, things they could not have done if Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was enforced. So here's the question for America. If Sessions has a contempt for the 15th Amendment as a senator, if he has tried to undermine the 15th Amendment as a senator, then why would you want him to be the Attorney General who is required to enforce the 15th Amendment? That's the kind of racism that we're talking about. Racism in America is not just about a white supremacist yelling the N-word or wearing robes or burning crosses. Racism is perpetrated through systems of power that consistently privilege white people while discriminating against people of color and other Americans. And when you look at his record on this, he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment for the protection of voting rights and has applauded false claims about voter fraud and real realities of voter suppression that is greater than things we've seen since the days of Jim Crow.
Well, Representative Luis Gutiérrez of Chicago, today we're going to see one of your colleagues in the House, John Lewis, as well as Senator Cory Booker, making a historic first ever testimony by a senator against one of his colleagues on a presidential nomination. Your concerns about Jeff Sessions and your reaction to his testimony yesterday?
Well, I have a grave concern. I have a grave concern beginning with his xenophobic, anti-immigrant rhetoric and positions with the most extreme sectors, not only in the Senate, but across this country. I'm worried about 750,000 young men and women who have achieved legality in this country through President Obama's executive order, which he will threaten. He can easily threaten them. He can revoke that as the Attorney General. Simply somebody sues and he says, I agree, which is exactly his attitude. He doesn't believe in immigration. He'll say, well, I just want to take care of the illegal immigrants. No, he doesn't believe in immigration, period. So as a man born in 1953, when separate but equal was the law of the land, when I was born, I see in Jeff Sessions a man who wants black people to be quiet, immigrants to be silent and invisible, women back in the kitchen and gays in the closet. And there is a particular statement of the senator and a position to back up. So if that's the America you want to make great again, then Jeff Sessions is your guy. And so I'm very concerned about the progress that we have made, especially as the Reverend has talked about the Voting Rights Act. Look, Juan, you and I would not be having this conversation. I would not have been elected to the Congress of the United States had it not been for the brave men and women in America leading the civil rights movement that gave us a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Rights Act, which finally allowed me to be in Congress. And I'm going to raise my voice because that is the tradition that I feel a responsibility to and a debt to. Latinos get to speak today because black people were murdered and lynched and their churches were burned and others became allies of theirs in a great civil rights movement. And we cannot simply turn our backs on that history, that great history of our nation.
I wanted to go to the letter that was just released of Coretta Scott King. On Tuesday, the Washington Post published a 9-page letter written by King in 1986 opposing Jeff Sessions' nomination to a federal judgeship. You know, this is very significant, nominated by Reagan. Ultimately, the Senate Judiciary Committee, it would only be Sessions, and I think over the past 50 years from that point, one other person had not been approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee for a judgeship. According to BuzzFeed News, which first reported the letter's existence, it was never entered in the congressional record by then Judiciary Committee Chair Strom Thurmond. King's opposition, however, proved critical to the argument against Sessions' confirmation. In the letter, she cites Sessions' attempted prosecution of 3 black civil rights workers in Marion, Alabama, for voter fraud. Coretta Scott King writes, when the circumstances and facts are analyzed, it becomes clear the motivation was political, the result frightening, the wide-scale chill of the exercise of the ballot for blacks who suffered so much to receive that right in the first place. Therefore, it's my strongly held view that the appointment of Jefferson Sessions to the federal bench would irreparably damage the work of my husband. King also writes, the irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he will be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. I believe that his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we've made toward fulfilling my husband's dream. Again, that a letter that Strom Thurmond did not enter into the congressional record, but that Coretta Scott King wrote opposing Sessions' U.S. attorney, judgeship, rather, nomination in 1986. I'm sure you know the case, Reverend Barber of the Marion Three very well, close allies of Dr. King, the Turners, gone after by the U.S. attorney at the time, Jeff Sessions, in Alabama. Ultimately, they were acquitted.
I do, and there's several things that were so striking and hypocritical at that hearing yesterday. You know, when Senator Sessions said, you know, he denounced the Klan, you know, those are kind of common phrases to say, you know, I did this. He said he didn't call the NAACP un-American. Basically, he's saying, I did these things. You all heard it, but you didn't really hear what you heard or see what you saw. In essence, he's calling Coretta Scott King a liar. He's saying the NAACP and our people are liars. He's even saying that Ms. Turner is a liar. You know, she's still alive. And just the other day, she says, I know Jeff Sessions. The leopard has not changed his spot. She said that he tried to put her and her husband in jail for 250 years. That's the same length of time that black people were enslaved in this country, and it was all over a fraudulent case. He claims to have worked on cases, but there's a Washington Post article that says he really didn't work on those cases. So what we have here is someone who has a clear record. He has a record in the past. He never repented of it. Now, he may say he may suggest that they weren't his ideas, but he's never repented of it and become an advocate for voting rights and a staunch supporter of the 15th Amendment. If anything, he has hardened over the years and become more shrewd over the years. I keep saying this constantly, Amy, to people. This Congress, for 1,296 days today, has refused to do its job. In essence, you've had what Dr. King called interposition and nullification in the Congress, refusing to fix the 15th Amendment. That in itself alone should be a disqualifier for someone who's being asked to lead the U.S. Attorney General's office. However, there's something else. Senator Sessions has stood against a legislation that would help vulnerable Muslim Americans, that would help the LGBT community. He has voted against immigrant rights and the rights of refugees. He has even voted against the Women's Act, Violence Against Women's Act, and he voted against a program that would help minorities, African Americans, and women have access to federal contracts, which means he's not only in contempt, he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment, he has a contempt for the 14th Amendment, which, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which says you cannot discriminate in any programs that receive federal money. So he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment. He has shown contempt for the 14th Amendment, which says equal protection under the law should be provided to all people regardless of their race, their color, their creed, their sexuality. He's shown a contempt for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI. So someone who has shown a contempt for these things cannot be put in office to be the law enforcement officer over these things. It's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house.
Luis, Amy, I mean, I'd like to just put it in a little bit of a personal perspective. So the America that my daughters live in is a different America than the one that their mom and their grandmother. He wants to take Roe versus Wade and eliminate it. When you take the totality of the man, let's remember, when they say they want to make America great again, they want to go back to a time in which women and gays and Latinos were simply quiet and shut out of the process. And as the Reverend has so articulately presented, it is very clear that and let me just say this so that we're clear, when Donald Trump called for a ban and a registry on Muslim, he was the first one to stand up, the first senator and the first member of the Republican Party to stand up, support, and applaud and endorse Donald Trump for President of the United States. So he can say what he wants today, but I think we should judge him on his actions of yesterday.
Well, Congressman Gutierrez, I'd like to ask you about another issue that came up in the hearings, which is the issue of consent decrees that the Justice Department has reached with a variety of cities that are dealing with constitutional violations by their police departments. During Jeff Sessions' hearing, Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas questioned Sessions about the role of law enforcement in communities.
We need to be sure that when we criticize law officers, it is narrowly focused on the right basis for criticism, and to smear whole departments places those officers at greater risk. And we are seeing an increase in murder of police officers. It was up 10% last year. So I just could say, I could feel in my bones how it was going to play out in the real world when we had what I thought oftentimes was legitimate criticism of a perhaps wrongdoing by an officer, but spilling over to a condemnation of our entire police force. And morale has been affected, and it's impacted the crime rates in Baltimore and crime rates in Chicago. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I regret that's happening. I think it can be restored, but we need to understand the requirement that that the police work with the community and be respectful of their community, but we as a nation need to respect our law officers too.
That was Senator Jeff Sessions.
Sure.
He was told that there are about 20 cities right now that have consent decrees as a result of widespread abuses by their police department. That includes New York and Newark, and Baltimore is about to sign another one in the next few days. Sure. Your concern about this issue of police abuse and the consent decrees that Sessions indicated that he would be disposed to revisiting whether some of them should be ended.
Look, I'm from Chicago. Everybody has seen the tape of a young black 17-year-old man, young man, Laquan McDonald, shot 15 times in 16 seconds. And because our community demands the intervention of the federal government so that people are not abused, so that people are not murdered. Look, the fact is that happened. And 6 other Chicago police officers said and filled out forms saying the officer's life was under threat. That man is being charged. That officer is being charged for murder in Cook County. Chicago voters took actions against the Attorney General. Chicago voters took actions against the superintendent of police. Chicago voters are going to continue to take action, not only in Chicago, but across this country to protect the lives. Juan, you and I both know, even in Puerto Rico, they're under a consent decree because the police are there to carry out political orders of those in power. So the police job is to serve and protect the public. And where they do not do that, it is incumbent upon the federal government to intervene when local governments will not. And so I think it's an important matter and one that we should be very, very fearful of. The greatest tool, Juan, that the police have in protecting you and me and the American citizens, their greatest tool is the trust and the confidence of the American people. It isn't the badge. It isn't the gun. It isn't the sophisticated car and equipment that they have. It is the reliability of the support of the people. And the only way you're going to get that is when there's trust and confidence and respect between the people and the Chicago police and police departments across this nation.
Reverend Barber, you're trying to jump in there.
Yeah, because I think it's important for us to unpack how Sessions is trying to talk about racism in a way that is, to be quite honest, dangerous in a democracy. Let me step back for a second, for instance, on the case against Ms. Turner and her husband. You know, one of the things I've shared with President Brooks, and I hope he'll do today, is to say when you testify, have her there or have somebody from her family there. Put a face on this extremism. Same thing about police brutality and criminal justice reform. Have some of those mothers there that have lost their sons. And then in that context, say to him, this is not just about individual road cops. That is to dismiss systemic racism and systemic problems that have been proven whenever the Justice Department has gone in and done a clear analysis of police departments, like in Ferguson, for instance. They found a systemic problem. But what Sessions is trying to do, and what oftentimes folk like him attempt to do because they really do not want to deal with systemic racism, is subject is just an individual. That is not a systems problem. Now, on other matters, it's a systems problem. When it comes to health care, for instance, they say we have a bad system. You know, Obamacare is a bad system, or our taxes is a bad system. But when it comes to racism, they say, oh, that's just one bad apple. It does not represent systemic racism. And the reality is when we have unarmed African-American men, women, boys, and girls, unarmed, being shot over and over again and killed over and over again, when we have more people in our prison system today, African Americans, than we had enslaved in slavery by some estimates, when you represent only 12% of the population, but more than 50% of the incarceration, when it's proven that African Americans do less drugs, for instance, than others, but are incarcerated at rates much higher, as one of my friends said, this is a new Jim Crow. Ms. Alexander says, this is a new Jim Crow. It's a systems problem. And he doesn't want to deal with the system, because if you deal with the system of racism and incarceration, then you have to deal with the system of racism and voting rights, and the system and racism and de-investment in communities that are black, brown, and poor, and even white poor communities. He doesn't want to deal with the system. But the U.S. Attorney General, that's the U.S. Attorney General's job, to examine systems and how those systems and individuals running those systems comply with the laws of this land. He's the wrong person.
I wanted to turn to the issue of women and assault for a minute before we go to break, and then we'll get your reaction to President Obama's farewell address in your city, Luis Gutierrez, in Chicago. Last October, after the release of the 2005 tape of Donald Trump saying that as a celebrity he can, quote, grab women by the pussy, unquote, Jeff Sessions was asked if such behavior constituted sexual assault. At the time, Senator Sessions responded, quote, I don't characterize that as a sexual assault. I think that's a stretch, unquote. Well, at Tuesday's hearing for Senator Sessions to be U.S. Attorney General, Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy asked Sessions the same question again.
Is grabbing a woman by her genitals without consent, is that sexual assault?
Clearly, it would be.
Congressman Luis Gutierrez, your response in this change of heart of Senator Sessions.
I wish it was a change of heart. Look, one of the primary reasons is that I will not go to this inauguration. And I want to be clear. I went to George Bush's inauguration. I've been here for 25 years. This is my 25th year in Congress. So I've been to quite a few, Republican and Democrat inaugurations. Was exactly that statement. I cannot unhear it. My mind doesn't work so that I can eliminate those expressions of the president-elect Donald Trump. And what did he say? They tried to normalize it during the campaign by saying that it was simply the talk of people in a gym, right? Well, it's not. And if anyone were to say that in a locker room, and I've been to a locker room here in Congress, or right here in the Rayburn building, thousands of days I've spent in that locker room over the last 24 years, and I'll tell you, I've never heard such an expression, and if I did hear such an expression, it would not go unchallenged by me, and I don't believe that it is normal. It is abnormal for me to hear those kinds of expressions, and for me to have to stand by and normalize those kinds of expressions at an inauguration is something I cannot do. That I cannot look at my wife and my daughters and my grandson in the face if I were to stand at that inauguration. So instead, Amy, I think we should take a positive action. And so I'm coming on Inauguration Day, not to the inauguration, but to get ready, to see what kind of clothing I'm going to need, what kind of preparations I'm going to need, so that my wife and I, hand in hand with what I believe will be 1 million other women, come together. And we need to come together because when women are attacked, we all are attacked. And when women win, we all win. Black women and Latino women and white women and Asian women, women from every color and every ethnicity marching together. And I want to say to women, Latinos are present. And yes, maybe immigration is my primary goal and objective, immigration reform. But I know that when I stand with women and women stand with immigrants and gays stand with those who want to increase the minimum wage, when we protect the Mother Earth against those who want to deny the science around our Earth, when we all march together, and that's what the opportunity for me is that day, to rebuke and to reject those kinds of statements made on the behalf of the president-elect. I just can't unhear it. And we know what Jeff Sessions said then. He said that was just locker room banter, and there wasn't much to be said. Now, of course, he wants to be Attorney General, so he's going to change his tune. But it really doesn't change how he thinks. Tell me his first reaction. Tell me his visceral reaction, right? And that's really how he feels about this issue. And I don't believe he's changed one iota.
Congressman Luis Gutierrez and Reverend Dr. William Barber, please stay with us. We're going to come back and get your response to President Obama's farewell address and also the death penalty sentence of Dylan Roof. Democracy Now! Will be covering the inauguration from 8 in the morning on Inauguration morning. That's January 20th until 3 in the afternoon, both the inauguration and the protests, and we'll be there on Saturday. What Luis Gutierrez is talking about right now, the Million Women March, will be broadcasting from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon from right there in Washington, D.C., outside where the march will take place. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
Ser como el aire libre no más se pasa volando. Ser como la paloma también se pasa volando. Cuando yo era chico, mi madrecita decía: cuídate, mi mijito, no te me metas en líos. Ser como el aire libre no más se pasa volando. Ser como la paloma también se pasa volando.
Be Free Like the Wind by Agustin Lira and Alma. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we talk about what happened on Tuesday night, President Obama's farewell address.
Yes, he gave it at Chicago's McCormick Place Convention Center. One of the issues he addressed was voting rights.
Which brings me to my final point. Our democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. All of us, regardless of party, should be throwing ourselves into the task of rebuilding our democratic institutions. When voting rates in America are some of the lowest among advanced democracies, we should be making it easier, not harder, to vote. When trust in our institutions is low, we should reduce the corrosive influence of money in our politics and insist on the principles of transparency and ethics in public service. When Congress is dysfunctional, we should draw our congressional districts to encourage politicians to cater to common sense and not rigid extremes.
That was President Obama in his farewell speech last night. I wanted to ask Congressman Gutierrez a couple of things. At the end of his speech, he referred back to the theme of his original race, yes, we can, si se puede, and he ended saying, yes, we did. I'm wondering your reflections now on what yes, we did meant to you. What was accomplished, what wasn't accomplished, the issue of DACA of the DACA youth, and also of Oscar Lopez Rivera that you have been raising repeatedly.
Look, today we're going to get together at noon in front of the White House. I'm so thankful to Bishman Desmond Tutu, to former President Jimmy Carter, to the mayor of San Juan, to the mayor of New York, to so many religious leaders, archbishops and cardinals and religious leaders demanding the release of Oscar Lopez Rivera. 35 years in jail for loving his country and wanting the independence of Puerto Rico. And so we're petitioning the president, and I'm hopeful. Here's what I think. I think in the end, he began with a huge crisis, right? And that really tied his hands. In any given month when he was first elected, 1 million jobs disappeared. And so we had that emerging a crisis, economic crisis. And look, Healthcare is important. It's a basic, fundamental human right. It's not a political right. It's a human right. It shouldn't be to the political wins in this country. There are 20 more million people covered by healthcare. Ironically, large numbers of rural white Americans that had no access to health care were the primary beneficiaries of Obamacare. So I'm excited. Could we have done more? Could we have reformed our immigration system? Absolutely. We challenged this president, and in the end, he responded to the challenge by taking the kinds of executive actions that freed 750,000 Dreamers, that took all the way to the Supreme Court his subsequent executive orders that were challenged by the Republican Party. And so when I look at immigration, I see a president that started one place and ended in a very good place when it came to our immigration policy. So I'm going to say, President Barack Obama, we had a lot of fighting with you. We had a lot of challenging, but in the end, you turned around, you spoke to us, you listened, and you acted. And would I have wanted it to have been done earlier? Absolutely. But I think between fixing our economy, getting us back on the right track, healthcare. Let's remember, and Donald Trump will say, well, I saved 500 jobs here, or there's 1,000 jobs there. What about the millions of jobs that were maintained in America with GM and Chrysler when we intervened? That's Barack Obama. That's the Democrats, Dodd-Frank, and making sure that we do not put the future of people's pensions at risk, the future of our economy at risk because of the greed on Wall Street. I think there are many wonderful things. And look, in the end, I have a grandson that's 13 years old. And when he went, he got to see the President of the United States. So I know it's very, he got to see it. And he said to President Obama, he said, thank you, Mr. President, because now my cousins and my aunts and uncles can stay when he issued those broader executive authority. I'm happy to see a young Latino man being able to speak to a grown black man that is President of the United States, and that's his experience.
How many times were you arrested during the Obama administration protesting around it? Twice. And I just want to clarify the clemency petition for the Puerto Rican independence activist Oscar Lopez Rivera, for people who don't know, has been in jail for 35 years, much of the time in solitary confinement. His sentence was commuted by President Clinton. He refused to leave because others were staying in prison. Those people have left now, and you are asking for that pardon for him.
Amy, when I got to Congress in '93, I began petitioning then President Clinton. And Clinton was very different than Obama. Clinton would sit down and talk to you as a member of Congress when you went to petition him for pardon, and he would talk about the political situation as the rest of his staff. Unfortunately, Obama isn't quite as forthright and as open in talking about these issues. But today we will stand, and I'm so happy that you put Oscar Lopez's case in. Yes, so what President Clinton did in 1999, and he said, I'm releasing 12 of them. And he offered a release to Oscar Lopez, but there was a 13th. And Oscar Lopez said, until all of us are released, I cannot accept the release, and so he remained in jail.
I wanted to end the show with Reverend Barber responding to the farewell address of President Obama.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I want to say real quickly, I do believe, just jumping back a little bit, that Senator Sessions still believes in assaulting women, because he refused to stand by Loretta Lynch and block both of the women, tried to block both of the women that President Obama wanted to point to the Supreme Court, including a Latino. So that's a form of political assault. You know, I take the tradition of Martin Luther King and others. The goal of faith and moral leaders is to challenge and to push our leaders. And President Obama last night tried to say some things to America that weren't about left and right and conservative versus liberal. Number one, we have to deal with race and class together. You can't separate the two.
We have 10 seconds, and then we'll continue after. But in your final 10 seconds?
Well, that's the first one. I just want to say you can't separate it. When you have, for instance, 64 million people making less than a living wage and 54% of African Americans making less than a living wage, that's not a race issue and a class issue. It's both, and we have to have the courage to deal with it.
Well, let's continue this discussion in a web exclusive. People can go online. Reverend William Barber, Congressmember Luis Gutierrez, thanks so much.